Hey guys, Eileen here from Homegrown Happiness. Welcome to September's video. It's spring, trees are blooming, there are flowers out, I'm getting sun in lots of spaces that I wasn't getting sun in previously, so it just feels like changes in the air and it's awesome and I'm really excited. So in the top garden, I filmed this at about 11:30 and you can see it's not very sunny anymore, but the point was that it was sunny and there is still a little bit at the bottom in a couple of areas that didn't get sun like that in winter, so that's a huge fantastic change that is getting some sun now. In today's video, the main job was planting potatoes. They are my main crop potatoes because I have already quite a few that I've planted in pots of my early varieties. I have a swift and a mouldy purple potato, but this is now my main crop. So I've got two spaces that I've allocated to the potatoes because they're not very big, so I'm just going to try and split them. I have this little spot here by my garlic bed and then another little space here by the stairs. So I'm going to be planting these potatoes no dig starts, just layering on compost and then popping the potatoes in there and then covering with straw. So to do that, I'm going to first get some of my homemade compost. So I have my bin, which has the compost in it that's like on the go at the moment, and then next to that is a big pile of compost that has already broken down. So usually once I can see it's broken down in the bin, I'll scoop it out. Therefore my bin is empty and I can just keep refilling it. So this compost is quite rough. There was loads of big chunks in there. The majority of it has broken down, but there's heaps of debris that's was too big or too hard that hasn't broken down. So to get rid of that, I'm going to sieve it. So I have a container and then I've got some chicken wire that I'm going to use as a sieve. And it's as simple as just dumping the compost on and shaking it or rubbing it over to remove all the good compost and then leave all the big chunks behind. And then what's left is some beautiful crumbly black gold. So an ideal compost pile has a really well balanced carbon to nitrogen ratio. You don't have to get too specific about it and get exact amounts, but roughly aim for 3 parts carbon, 1 part nitrogen. And so your carbons are all the brown dead things, brown leaves, straw, hay, shredded paper, and then your greens are like the fresher things. Doesn't have to just be green because coffee grinds are one of the fresh nitrogens, grass clippings, green waste that you've cut back. So those are your two main groups that you want to put in the compost, and usually when you add one, add the other. It shouldn't be smelly and it should start breaking down quickly. And if you do turn it maybe every 2 weeks or so, there should be some heat in there. To get a really hot compost, then you do need to be a little bit more specific with your ratios and how often you turn it and things like that. But with a general compost, there still should be heat, which shows that it's breaking down. A lot of the time, the things that go wrong with compost are that it gets slimy and smelly, and that's a classic sign of too much nitrogen in there. And then you can remedy that by adding more carbon. So don't worry about measuring it or trying to get exact amounts. Just see what your compost lacks by how it's feeling and smelling. If your compost is really stagnant and dry, then it'll be the opposite, too much carbon, and then you'll need to remedy that by adding some more fresh greens, like coffee grinds or grass clippings, something that will speed it up. And then obviously chopping things into smaller pieces will aid with decomposition a lot. There are certain things that I wouldn't put in my compost, like fish frames, or if I had like meat scraps or things like that, and then I don't want to throw those away in landfill either, so then I would dig a hole and bury those nice and deep, and then the worms underground will break that down. I also have a worm farm, and in that goes a lot of our fruit scraps and any cooked food scraps that I'm not burying in the garden and that I don't want to compost because I don't want vermin getting it, so those will go to the worm farm. And with a worm farm, a general tip is if you are feeding something new to your worms and you don't know if they're going to like it or not, put it in just like a corner of the worm farm so that your worms have the ability to move away from it if they don't like it. So then you'll be able to tell if the worms eat it, it's good. If they don't eat it, don't do that again. So now I've got my compost that I'm going to be using for potatoes, and I'm also going to be adding on some aged manure. This is aged horse manure. And I'm just going to mix that with the compost. So the potatoes that I'm planting are agria potatoes, and I'm simply just scraping back that compost, making a little hollow, and then putting the potato in there. And once they're all buried, I'm just going to cover them with straw, and then I'll just keep adding mulch as the potato greens grow, just to stop any potatoes from coming up and seeing the sun, because then they'll become toxic. with the rest of the manure that I had, I'm just going to spread that out in the areas that are empty in the garden at the moment, just in preparation for spring planting. Now is a really good time to feed your soil. It's a bit too early to put out many of the summer crops, so it's just time for preparation really, and so that when you do start planting out your summer seedlings, they will be planted in thriving soil. And that's about all that I'm doing at this top garden. My plan though over the next few weeks is to sow heaps of wildflowers. So I've got these little areas here around where my fruit trees are that are empty, and I think that they would be great to be filled with wildflowers. So I will be doing that probably at the end of this month, just spread over compost and then just sow seed. And then coming down to the bottom garden, this is getting sun too now. In the winter the sun doesn't get high enough, so then it gets blocked by the big trees that are at the top of the property. They aren't on our land, unfortunately, otherwise I would like to top them to get a little bit more sun, but they are the neighbours' trees. So, but now the sun is high enough, so it's actually reaching the bottom garden, which is fantastic. And in this garden I've planted some beetroot, some onions, some carrots, some celery, lettuce and some peas. The lettuce is under this cloth to keep the blackbirds off it. And there's a passion fruit. So here are some of the potatoes that I planted in buckets. They're the purple mouldy potatoes. I planted those in buckets because they can be quite invasive if left in the garden. They create quite small potatoes, so if you don't dig them all up, then they're just going to spread out everywhere. And in this part of the garden I've planted some more dwarf fruit trees. They're dwarf peaches. There were grasses there previously which were pretty but useless, so I took those out and I moved them to the fence. And then coming down to the front lawn, it's nice to see some strawberry flowers coming. My grapes are kicking into gear. Here's my garlic looking nice. Radishes. And then my cabbages, they're firming up really nicely. I will be picking them soon. And then there's just lots of other little bits and pieces crammed in. We've been harvesting lots of sprouting broccoli late winter. That's been really fantastic to have that. I'm definitely planting that next year. And then I've got another little space that I don't often show, which is by our front door. This is now where I've put a lot of the berries. I used to have blueberries at the top, but they didn't really thrive up there, so I moved them to this area by the front door, and they've so far been doing quite well. It gets pretty good morning sun in summer, so I'll see if it's enough to ripen the blueberries, but you can only try these things. So yeah, there's lots of berries here. I've got the blueberries, I've got some boysenberries and some raspberries and strawberries around a cherry tree. And then I've got my little greenhouse out. It doesn't have that much in it yet. I've got more seedlings inside. So inside I've sown more tomatoes since my last video, as well as some pumpkins, cucumbers, zucchini, and then I'll do those again in about a week's time just so I can stagger my harvest. And then I'm also going to be starting off my corn in a few weeks as well. And that's it for September's video. So for the rest of the time I am going to sow the wildflowers, keep up with sowing seeds inside, keep prepping the garden and putting compost and manure in spaces that are empty. And yeah, enjoy spring pretty much, because it's awesome and it's really nice to see life coming back. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.